Clement Ash was 73 years old, a man who had spent 40 years buying restaurants that needed saving and making them into something worth staying for. He had owned 11 of them at various points in his life. He had sold most of them. He drove a modest car. He wore the same kind of clothes he had worn since he was 40, comfortable, plain, nothing that required attention. He kept a small spiral notebook in his jacket pocket and wrote in it the way he noticed things, quietly, without announcement, in the margins of whatever was happening around him. On a Tuesday evening in September, he walked into a restaurant called Hearth and Vine and sat at a table near the window. The restaurant was half empty. A server named Tessa looked at him, formed a judgment in approximately 4 seconds, and told him the establishment was fully booked for the evening. She suggested there were some excellent places down the block that might be more his speed. He thanked her. He left. He called his attorney from the parking lot. He told her to close the deal. The next morning, he came back. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. He had been watching Hearth and Vine for 2 months, not because of any particular plan at first. He had passed it one afternoon on the way to another meeting and recognized the building, a brick corner property in a neighborhood he had known for 30 years. He had pulled over. He had looked at it for a moment. He had sat in his car and let the recognition settle. Then he had gone to the meeting and come back the following week and sat at the bar and ordered coffee and watched how the place ran. He could read a restaurant the way other people read a book, the pacing of the servers, the quality of the table resets between covers, the sound from the kitchen at different times of day, the specific way staff spoke to guests, whether they were present in the exchange or somewhere else. He had spent 40 years reading rooms like this one, and what he read at Hearth and Vine over several visits was a place that had forgotten what it was, which was not entirely the fault of the people currently working there. The fault was in what the place had been told to become. Clement had started his career in restaurants at 26, not in management, not in ownership, but washing dishes at a diner that had been in the same family for 30 years. He had worked every station over 4 years. He had watched how a well-run room moved and what it felt like when a poorly run one tried to compensate. He had opened his first restaurant at 32 with a bank loan and a menu written in a spiral notebook at a kitchen table. It had been a modest place in a neighborhood that was changing, honest food at honest prices, the kind of welcome that made people come back, not because there was nowhere else, but because they preferred to be there. He had learned the one thing that separated restaurants that lasted from restaurants that failed. The people running them either understood that hospitality was a form of respect offered to every person who walked through the door, or they didn't. Everything else was details. He had built his 11 restaurants on that understanding. He had sold most of them when the right time came, because he had always known that building something well and owning it forever were different commitments, and he had been clear about which one he was making. The money from those sales was what made him the kind of man whose phone call to his attorney from a parking lot at 8:23 p.m. could close a deal before morning. He did not advertise any of this. He drove a modest car. He wore comfortable clothes. He kept his notebook in his jacket pocket. He was a man who had spent 40 years learning what things were actually worth, and he did not see the point of announcing the conclusion. Hearth and Vine had been opened 21 years earlier by a man named Dennis Moore, who had been Clement's closest friend for 30 years, and who had died 3 years ago of a condition he had not told anyone about until it was nearly finished with him. Dennis had opened the restaurant with a specific intention, a place in a changing neighborhood that would be for the neighborhood. Good food, honest prices, the kind of welcome that made a person feel known from the second visit. It had been that for 15 years. Then Dennis had sold it, not because he wanted to, but because the illness had made certain decisions for him, and the buyers had seemed like good stewards. They had renovated, they had repositioned, they had installed a reservation system for a restaurant that had never needed one. They had trained the staff to sort guests by appearance. The renovation had not paid off. The debt had piled up. The current owners were looking for a buyer. Clement had been in quiet discussions about acquiring it for 8 weeks when he walked in on that Tuesday evening and sat near the window. He had his notebook open. He was writing operational observations, the table spacing, the lighting levels, the acoustics in the back section. He was mid-note when the server arrived. Tessa was 29 and had been working at Hearth and Vine for 14 months. She was, by conventional measure, a good server, accurate, efficient, skilled at the sequence of a table. She had learned, in those 14 months, something that had been taught to her by the restaurant's current culture, which had been taught to it by the renovation and repositioning and the specific aspirational clientele the new owners had been chasing, how to look at a guest and decide quickly they belong. She looked at Clement. He was in his regular clothes, a dark jacket worn soft at the elbows, a white shirt, no tie, comfortable shoes. His hair was silver. He had a small spiral notebook open on the table and was writing in it. He had ordered nothing because no one had come to the table yet. He looked up when she arrived with the specific warmth of a man who has been in restaurants his whole life and is always glad to be in one. She said the restaurant was fully booked for the evening. He looked around. There were 11 empty tables in his direct line of sight. "I see there's some availability," he said. Not accusatory, curious. The way a man asks a question when he genuinely wants to understand the answer. She said those were reserved. He asked if there was bar seating. She said the bar was reserved for guests with a reservation or hotel tie-in. He looked at her for a moment, not with anger, not with the wounded expression of a man who feels wronged, but with the quiet attentiveness of someone who is receiving exactly the information they needed. He made a note in his notebook. "I appreciate that," he said. "Is there somewhere nearby you'd suggest?" She said there were some excellent places down the block, more casual, probably more his speed. He closed the notebook. He thanked her. He stood unhurried and buttoned the single button on his jacket. At the far end of the room, a young man named Samuel, 22, 8 months on the job as a busboy, the kind of person who showed up every shift intending to do it right, had watched the exchange from the moment Tessa arrived at the table. He had been 2 steps from suggesting the bar when she had cut across him. He had watched Clement prepare to leave with the expression of someone who had witnessed something he knew was wrong, but did not yet know how to name. He came around the end of the bar quickly and caught Clement at the door. "Sir," he said. He stopped. He looked at him directly. "I'm sorry. What just happened wasn't how this place is supposed to work." Clement looked at him for a moment. He looked at the nameplate on his shirt. "Thank you, Samuel," he said. "You're right, it isn't." He walked to his car. He sat for a moment. He looked at the brick corner building, and at the neon sign in the window, and at the name his old friend had chosen for the place, Hearth and Vine, which had always been about the two things Dennis believed a restaurant needed to offer: warmth and something worth staying for. He called Adese Mensa at 8:23 p.m. "Close it," he said. "Tomorrow." Adese Mensa had been Clement's business attorney for 19 years. She was 59 years old, precise and unhurried, the kind of attorney who had seen most situations and treated none of them as exceptional. She had been negotiating the Hearth and Vine acquisition for 8 weeks at Clement's direction, patiently, without rush, building the deal the way Clement approached all his deals, in the right order, at the right pace, with the right documentation. He had told her at the start of the process that he was not in a hurry, that he wanted to understand the property fully before he committed, that the last thing he wanted was to acquire something and fix it wrong. She had organized the due diligence accordingly: the financial records, the lease structure, the staff rosters, the vendor contracts, the inspection reports on the kitchen and the building. She had assembled a picture of the place that was complete in every dimension except the one Clement had been gathering himself on those Tuesday visits in the notebook. Now he had that too. She had the papers ready. She had been waiting for the call. "I'll have everything signed by 7, she said. "Good," he said. "I'll need one other thing." He told her about the photograph. He had seen it in the due diligence files, a digital copy, scanned from the original print Dennis's daughter had shared with Adese during the background research. He described where it needed to be. Adese made a note without asking why. She had been with him long enough to know that when he made a specific request, there was a specific reason, and the reason would become clear at the right moment. At 6:47 the following morning, the papers were signed. Hearth and Vine passed into ownership of Clement Ash through his holding company. Adese filed the relevant documents with the county recorder's office at 7:12. At 7:30, a letter was delivered to the restaurant's current general manager, a man named Corey, who had been hired by the previous owners and who had, in assessment from his visits, the operational instincts to run the place correctly if he were given the correct direction. The letter informed him of the ownership change, effective immediately, and requested his cooperation in preparing for a staff meeting at 9 a.m. Corey called the letter's contact number. Adaze answered. Corey asked 3 questions, all reasonable. Adaze answered them. He agreed to coordinate the staff meeting. Clement arrived at the restaurant at 8:47, 13 minutes before the meeting. He stopped in the entryway. He looked at the wall to the left of the host stand. He looked at the space where Adaze had arranged, overnight, for one thing to be hung, a photograph from the restaurant's opening year, 21 years ago. Dennis behind the bar on opening night, his hand raised toward the camera, his expression the expression of a man who had just built something he was proud of. Clement stood in front of the photograph for a moment. He had not seen it in years. He had not known, until he found it in the files Adaze had assembled during the acquisition due diligence, that it still existed. He went to the table at the window where he had been sitting the night before. He opened his notebook. He began to write. The staff arrived between 8:40 and 9, including Tessa and Samuel and Corey and 6 servers and 2 kitchen staff. They came in the way people come into a room when they don't know what the room is going to require of them. Carefully, with the specific alertness of people who have read the letter and understood that something structural had changed. Some of them recognized Clement from his Tuesday visits. He had sat at different tables on different visits, ordered different things, spoken to different staff. None of them had known who he was. Most of them had treated him the way you treat a regular customer, with the ordinary warmth that comes from familiarity without recognition. He had noted all of them. He had noted them because he had always believed that the most reliable information about a restaurant's character was how the staff behaved toward guests who offered them no visible reason to perform. Corey introduced Clement. He gave the name and a single sentence of context. The new owner, effective this morning, who had been in the hospitality industry for 40 years. Clement thanked Corey. He looked at the room. He spoke quietly and without performance. He told them what the restaurant had been when his friend opened it. He told them what his friend had believed a restaurant was for, not the hospitality industry definition, not the positioning document the previous owners had written, but the specific thing Dennis had told him the night before opening, that a restaurant that treated every guest as though their presence was the most important thing that had happened to the room that day would always have a full room, because people knew, without being able to name it, when they were in a place that was glad they came. He said that was what this place was going to return to being. He looked at Samuel. "I want to start with you," he said. "I understand you said something last night that was accurate, and that cost you some discomfort to say." He paused. "That's not a small thing. The management trainee position I'm opening on Monday has your name on it if you want it." Samuel looked at him. He nodded once. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Clement looked at Tessa. "I sat at table last night," he said. He didn't gesture at it. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew which table. "I want you to understand something about this restaurant and who it is for." He paused. "It's for everyone who comes through the door and sits down and wants to feel welcome. That's the whole of it. That's always been the whole of it." He looked at her with the specific steadiness of a man who has said the important thing and is waiting to see whether it lands. "I'm not asking you to leave," he said. "I'm asking you to decide whether that's the restaurant you want to work in." He picked up his notebook. He wrote a single line. The room was quiet. He looked up. He looked at the photograph on the wall. "This is what it was," he said. "Let's make it that again." It did not happen all at once. The restaurant took 3 months to settle into the direction Clement had outlined. Some of the changes were operational. The reservation system was scaled back for half the dining room. The bar was reopened for walk-ins. The menu was adjusted to reflect what the neighborhood had always wanted from the place. The pricing came down. The portions went up. The kitchen staff, who had been preparing for a clientele that required minimalism on the plate and maximum pricing, took 2 weeks to recalibrate their instincts and 3 more weeks to start enjoying the work again. Clement noticed the shift in the kitchen noise around week 6. A restaurant where the kitchen staff are enjoying the work sounds different from one where they aren't. He made a note of the specific day. Some of the changes were in the staff. 2 people left in the first month, not because they were asked to, but because the version of the restaurant they had signed up for was not the version it was becoming. They left without incident. Corey handled it with the specific calm of a manager who understood that alignment matters more than retention. Tessa stayed. She did not stay immediately. She took a week to decide. She came back on a Thursday and worked a full shift and said nothing particular about the shift. But Corey noted that the table near the window, the one she knew, received a level of care that was different from the Tuesday before. He noted it and said nothing. He understood that some changes happen in the work, not in the conversation about the work. He had been in the industry long enough to know the difference between a person who understood what was being asked of them and one who was simply performing compliance. Tessa was not performing. She was adjusting. Those were not the same thing. Samuel started the management trainee program on the Monday after the staff meeting, as Clement had said. He was, Clement noted in his journal 3 months in, exactly the person the program was built for. Someone who had seen what was right and acted on it before he had any reason to believe it would matter. He had done it not because he expected a reward, but because he was the kind of person who couldn't do otherwise. That, Clement had learned in 40 years, was the quality that was impossible to train into someone and essential to find. Clement was at the restaurant on Tuesday mornings. Most weeks he sat at different tables. He ordered coffee and whatever the kitchen was testing. He wrote in his notebook. He spoke to the staff by name because he had learned all of them, because he had always believed that an owner who didn't know the names of the people running the place was an owner who didn't understand what the place was made of. Dennis's photograph stayed on the wall by the entryway. Guests began to ask about it. Corey answered with the story, the opening, the neighborhood, what the place had been built to be. Most people listened. Some came back the following week. Hearth and Vine was full on Friday nights by the following spring. On a Tuesday morning in March, Clement Ash walked in through the front door of Hearth and Vine at 9 o'clock and sat at the table near the window. The restaurant was not yet open for service. The kitchen was preparing. He could hear it, the specific sounds of a kitchen that had found its rhythm, the particular confidence in the noise of people who knew what they were doing and were glad to be doing it. The morning light was coming through the windows at a low angle, the specific kind of morning light that was neither warm nor cold but simply honest, showing the room as it was, the table set, the bar stocked, the photograph on the wall by the entrance. He ordered coffee from the server who opened the floor. He opened his notebook. He wrote the date. He wrote 3 observations from the previous week's visit. He wrote Samuel's name with a note about a decision Samuel had made on Thursday that had been exactly right. He looked at the photograph on the wall. Dennis opening night, hand raised, the expression of a man who had just built something. He sat with his coffee and looked at the room that was becoming what it had been, in the way that things become what they were supposed to be when someone takes the time to restore them correctly. Some people move through the world deciding at a glance what a person is worth. It is always, in the end, the most expensive mistake. It costs them what it costs them. But it also costs them the chance to be in the presence of something they could have been part of, if only they had chosen to see it. He finished his coffee. He closed the notebook. The door opened. The first guests of the morning came in. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.